Hi, everyone. So I am actually very proud to present Dr. Jerry Krassner to you all. He speaks on astronomy, space, and policy talks to professional and general public audiences. He has a PhD in physics and astronomy and a 45-year-plus career in aerospace industry, and previously spoke to our group on the James Webb Space Telescope. His broad understanding of astronomy and space activities, ability to explain complex concepts at a general public level, and engaging style have made him a sought-after speaker. For today's presentation, Jerry combines his background with his genealogy hobby to focus on a different topic, the intriguing story of one B-17 crew in World War II. During a mission over Germany in World War II, a B-17 crashed in a Danish village with no crew aboard, locally known as a ghost flight. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Jerry Krassner with us to tell the story of the airplane, its crew, from training, battle, capture, and to survival. Jerry?
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is going to be a little challenge. Right, but I can't see a thing. Would I mind wearing it? What style? Okay. How's that? Okay. So thank you for coming and all done. Yeah, I was here two and a half years ago. I spoke about the James Webb Telescope. Did anybody here attend that talk? Wow. Does anybody remember that talk? Whoa. That has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today. Say again? Not good enough?
I think you can actually use this one and turn your computer.
Well, except I'm going to be projecting, pointing to that. Is this?
It's on.
Hello, hello? No? Better? Okay. I'll use it like this.
Even better.
I'm a scientist. I solve problems. Okay, how's that? Okay. So I have called this talk Fortress and Fortitude, the story of the ghost flight. It is in 4 acts, and I am the narrator. You'll see why 4 acts, and you'll see why the name Fortress and Fortitude came about. It was my attempt to be alliterative on the title, something a little bit catchy, but you'll see there was a fortress, and there was a lot of fortitude shown by the crew and the airplane in World War II. So, as with any story, you start introducing the cast. There are 4 main players. One, of course, is the B-17 bomber, which I presume everybody is pretty familiar with. It's the staple of every World War II movie. It was the American heavy bomber in World War II. Of course, and I'll show a picture of that in a moment. The crew is the next member of our cast, and we'll meet them and what they went through from training through combat, through post-life, post-World War life. The Lockhart family, Gene Lockhart, who will play a prominent role here, and of course the Germans and the Danes will be sprinkled throughout here. So let's meet the cast. The B-17 bomber, crew of 10, pilot, co-pilot, a series of gunners, machine gunners, sprinkled throughout the airplane, front and back, top and bottom, and left and right, whose job was to protect the crew and the ship from enemy fighters. You probably have all seen this a million times. We'll talk about one particular B-17 in some detail. The crew. There are 10 people on a standard B-17 crew. This is the crew of the flight in question, the Ghost flight. On the right, in that World War II typing, is the roster and the home addresses of the entire crew. And on the left, I wrote down who they are just because it's more readable. And you'll see number 3 bears some striking relationship to the speaker here. That was my father. And I guess I should also say that today, in the spirit of sharing stories and passing them down, et cetera, we have myself, my brother, my daughter, and her husband, and my granddaughter. So we have 3 generations from this crew hearing this story, and not quite, but almost for the first time. Certainly the first time in a coherent, full way. So they better like it. We'll go through these people and see what role each of them played and what their experiences were and what happened to them and their return to America as we go through the acts. Here's what the crew looks like. The 8 of them, they're actually, one is an unidentified person. On that side, I don't know if this pointer is doing any good. Can you see it? Okay, yeah, it reflects off. So on that side is my father. So what do you think? Any resemblance? The navigator on the right is the bombardier, Harry Jensen, who will figure prominently in our story. And seated on the bench from this side, the pilot and co-pilot, some of the gunners, and up top, the radio engineer, some of the other gunners. Those are the crew. Welcome to the cast. Did anybody ever hear of Gene Lockhart? Don't tell. Gene Lockhart was a very prominent actor and singer, Broadway and film. And for those of us, including myself, who watched the old Sherlock Holmes movies, I watched them a lot in college with Basil Rathbone. Gene Lockhart was Dr. Watson. So you probably all saw him at some point without recognizing who it was. He will figure in a few moments. You might have heard of his daughter, June. June Lockhart just died this week, age 100, just 3 or 4 days ago, coincidentally. And so I see I have a typo in here. But we all know her as Lassie's mom. Probably half the guys in this room had a crush on her growing up. And she also will appear in this. For those who don't remember, and let me just say, it says Carl, should be Gene. Gene's picture was taken in 1941, June's in 1947, so that's about the same time frame as we'll be talking here, which is pretty much 1944, 1945, and forward. So that's what they looked like during the war. Here's June Lockhart for National Dog Week. There is such a thing, 1963. So that's how I think most of us remember June Lockhart. Welcome to the cast. So let's start our story. This is a story that the beginnings of which you probably heard anecdotally or in some movie. It's kind of like that doesn't really happen in real life. Yes, it does. We had a couple of crew members, including Harry Jensen, the bombardier, and they were in Los Angeles, and they were kind of out on the town for the evening, and they're just looking for a party, looking for a club, whatever, and this big limo rolls up to them, and the back seat window rolls down, and this fellow, who they didn't know who it was, says, you guys got any plans for the evening? Yeah, we're looking for something to do. Do you have a place to stay? Well, no, we'll figure that out as we go. I mean, remember, this crew, they're 22, 23, 24 years old, right? He gives them their card. If you need a place to stay, don't worry what time it is, you're welcome to come to my house, all right? Probably most of us here would say that would never happen today. It did happen in those days, and actually I can tell you from some personal experience, sometimes it still happens in this day, but it was, I think, pretty standard in those days during the war. So he said, if you need a place to stay, just show up. We'll take care of you. Fast forward a little bit. The crew is now training elsewhere. And a few of the crew, and again, the same Harry Jensen, the bombardier, they go to see the movie Lassie Come Home. And I must say, I have not seen the actual movie. I saw a million Lassie shows. But this was a pretty popular film at the time. It was starred Roddy McDowall, who became famous for Planet of the Apes. It had Elsa Lanchester, famous for Bride of Frankenstein, and by the way, married to Charles Lawton, and various other famous actors of the day. So it's a pretty popular movie. So they went to the movie theater, and they're coming home, and they're talking about the movie, and Harry says, if our bomber will try as hard to come home from a mission as that dog to get home, we ought to be a cinch to finish our 25 missions. Next, let's name our plane Lassie Come Home. And the crew agreed, and they did. And here on the other side, you see the plane Lassie Come Home, and that's Harry Jensen standing below it at the time. It's probably 1943. So, you know, kind of a nice thing. 25 missions, that was the standard deployment for the B-17 crews, and not many of them made it. It was a very dangerous job to be on a B-17. Tremendous losses. And actually, you might remember the movie Memphis Belle, which was a not so long ago movie about, I think, the only crew of 10 people that the same 10 crews stayed together and completed all 25 missions, one crew. So this was a dangerous job. And so they were kind of hoping the plane would get this spirit of Lassie and get them home no matter what happened. Okay, so ends Act 1. We now move to Act 2. They deploy overseas. We're now 1943, late 43. They did 18 missions successfully. Plane got shot up a little bit, always got them home, as they had requested of Lassie, and they were doing fine. 19th mission was as far as they got. In May of 1944, this massive raid, 750 airplanes, went to attack a factory in Poznan, Poland. They flew over, the city was clouded out. So they had alternate plans. So half the 750 planes went this way to another target, a secondary target. The other half of the planes went this way to another target in northern Germany called Stettin, village of Stettin, and they dropped their bombs. So now the planes have dropped their bombs, they're turning to come back to England, mission complete, and they get jumped by German fighters. And home for them was Army Air Force Base Kimbolton in England, which was just a little bit north of Cambridge, which is a little bit north of London. So that was their plan. But things did not go as planned. They ran into trouble. The German fighters got to them. Again, Harry Jensen, who, by the way, was somewhat prolific at documenting what happened, wrote letters, etc., which I have copies of, and we can talk about that in a little while. he kind of sums it up. We looked out and the wing was on fire. This is not a good thing. So the fighters got them. They knew they were not going to make it to England, so they said, let's head towards Sweden and see if we can make it. But it turned out that was not going to be the case. So the pilot looks out, sees the airplane on fire, it's not getting better, and they don't think they'll necessarily even make it to Sweden. So what he says is bail out. So I have never jumped out of an airplane. My father did. I asked him, and I must have been 10, 12, years old. Like all the rest of them, he never spoke about his war experience, but if you asked him, he was fine with it. It just never came up. So I said, Dad, I can't imagine you jumping out of an airplane. And he just looked at me like, matter of fact, and said, plane was on fire. Like, no discussion required. This was the best of a bad set of choices. We're jumping. And I said, what happened? Pilot said, jump. You don't ask where, you jump. You figure it out later. And so that's what they did. However, let's talk about where they were. This will be a little hard without the pointer, but on the little inset on the right, you see Germany. If you can see it right, that's all of Germany. Here's a blow-up of the north coast of Germany. And this island, where the arrow is, by the way, here's Stettin, where they dropped the bomb. So they came, they turned around, and they got jumped by the fighters, and now the plane's on fire, and they jumped. And they were basically, this island is this little island at the very northern tip of Germany. The plan was, we'll point the plane into the ocean, we'll jump. Point being, the Germans can't recover the airplane. So the plane will land in the sea, it'll sink if it doesn't blow up first, and we'll jump. Well, jumping into the sea in May, it's still a little cold. That's got to be essentially almost a death sentence, right? Who's going to come pick you up? How long are you going to be bobbing in the ocean till you freeze or run out of strength? And so somebody said to the pilot, and I have a sneaking suspicion, I can't prove this, it might have been my father. He was not a good swimmer. He was just able to swim, but he was not what you would call a strong swimmer. So somebody says to the pilot, do we really have to jump over the water? Or words to that effect. And the pilot, in a great example of courage, remember, his wing's on fire, it's getting worse, he turns the plane around, comes back over land so they can jump and land on land, and points the plane out of the ocean, the thinking being, again, it'll either blow up or it'll crash into the water, it'll sink, the Germans won't be able to recover it. I was telling this to the son of the pilot, and I should say that during COVID, I had a little extra time on my hands, and this is where the genealogy thing comes in. I tracked down the children of all of the crew members, and we had this new thing called Zoom, which, of course, we all live with every minute. It was pretty new then. And the 20 or so of us, and my brother and my daughter were on that call. We all met each other through Zoom on that call, and we all shared little tidbits of our story. And they all said essentially the same thing. Well, my father never talked about it. But you knew something happened. So he said something, and by getting all of these little tidbits, you can start to piece together the story. And, some people like jigsaw puzzles. Some people like mystery stories. That's what this is. This is a jigsaw puzzle or a mystery story. So we pieced together the story. We shared memorabilia, kind of got to know each other on that call. It was a great call. The son of the pilot, I had not tracked him down at that point. I subsequently did. I told him this story of his father coming back around so they could drop themselves over land instead of the ocean. His father, the pilot, died fairly young in the 1970s. So and it could have been as a result of this experience. We'll never really know. But the son never had heard this story. He was crying on the phone when I told him what his father had done. So basically, in my book, he saved the whole crew, because the whole crew did survive what I'm going to tell you and came back after the war. So Lieutenant Dunn is a hero. And just as a side note, probably 3/4, if not all of you, in your family have some similar World War II story from your parents or an uncle or whatever. And you would be amazed how you can piece these together even many years after the fact. And you'll see examples of that as I go through here. Okay, so they jumped, and Lieutenant Dunn saved the crew from drowning or dying in the jump by circling around. Dad, what happened to the plane? It blew up in midair. Oh, I guess this was a good choice. I didn't come along until almost 10 years after this. He hadn't met my mother yet, so obviously I would not have been around if he hadn't have jumped. But he did jump. They all jumped. Dad, I can't imagine you. What happened when you jumped? There were 3 choices, he said. One was you get captured by the local townspeople. They're going to shoot you on the spot. Why? Because you've been bombing them, right? Second choice, you get picked up by the SS police. What are they going to do? He says, they're going to torture you before they shoot you. But either way, option 1, option 2, you're going to die. Option 3, you get picked up by the Luftwaffe police. And this is what happened to the whole crew. I said, well, that doesn't sound like a better choice. Well, I guess versus being shot on the spot, it's a better choice. But he said, no. The Luftwaffe police had chivalry. To them, yes, you were an enemy, but you were a fellow aviator. And they treated you with a small degree of respect, more than the other options would have. And so they all got picked up. What you see here is my father's German POW card with his picture. I was saying to my brother at the lunch here, it's about the only picture we have of him with hair on his head. He is smiling. I mean, he just got captured. I mean, he smiled a lot, but I guess it was, hey, I'm alive, I'll smile. He seemed pretty relaxed there. It has his home address, it has his height and weight and all that kind of stuff. And it has his fingerprint. So he was 5 foot, at this point in time, he was 5'6", 190 pounds, a little bit stocky. Remember those numbers. He stayed 5'6" through his life, but the 190, no. And the other crew had similar experiences, guards, etc. Okay, we're going to fast forward from 1944 to 1963, when our family went to the movie theater to see this big movie called The Great Escape. And anybody from Long Island here? Not you. So we lived in Queens. We went to the Syosset Theater because it had one of those big screen Panavision screens before they chopped them all up into mini theaters. And we watched The Great Escape. And I remember vividly, walking through the parking lot after the movie, and my father saying, just really matter-of-factly, I was there. What? What are you talking about? He said, I was in the American camp, and you'll remember the movie, it was in the British camp. Well, they were right across the street from each other. And he said, when this Great Escape happened, we heard the shooting. We didn't know what it was at the time, but we heard the gunfire when the Germans discovered the tunnels and the people were trying to escape. Yeah, all right, I'll give him credit for I was there. On the right is an aerial picture of his POW, the American camp. That was Stalag Luft 3. It held about 10,000 prisoners, to give you a scale. So this is a pretty big POW camp. So they spent about a year, a little less than a year, in the camp. I have letters, I don't have it in here, but a letter from the senior American officer to the German commandant complaining about the conditions. He said the food was all wormy, and they had 150 calories a day. All right, what's that? Maybe a candy bar? So during that time, by the time my father got out, he was 50 pounds lighter. So he was 5'6" and 140 pounds. And this affected a number, the others had similar results, and some of them it impacted through the rest of their life, as you'll see. So after a 9-month or so period, the war started to come to an end, and the Russians were approaching the POW camp. The POW camp, Stalag Luft 3, it was in Germany, but it was on the Polish border, so it was fairly far east. Today, after the war, Germany lost that slice of land, so now the camp is actually in Poland, but it's just over the border. And there is a museum there. The Great Escape tunnels are still there. I mean, it's not a tourist spot, but it's a museum. Here come the Russians approaching from the east. Hitler decided these prisoners are a bargaining chip. I don't want the Russians to capture them. So as the Russians approached, and in the camp they could hear the artillery fire and the gunfire out in the distance, so they were probably 20 miles away or something like that. The decision was made by the German leadership to march the prisoners deeper into Germany, to keep the Russians from getting them. It became very famous, and there were thousands. This one camp was 10,000 people, so it was not the only camp. So you had a large migration of prisoners being force-marched into Germany. It's called the Long March. They got a call at the camp in the early evening. We are departing the camp, effective immediately. They had like an hour, 2 hours to gather whatever they could, which was very minimal. And they were force-marched deeper into Germany. Now, it turns out, as you can read in the red I highlighted, the conditions that confronted them were extreme: sub-zero temperatures, thick covering of snow, one of the coldest German winters in living memory. It was a blizzard. And they had 10,000-ish people, stretching over 5 kilometers, 3 miles, marching as ragged prisoners. Remember, my father, he lost 50 pounds. Is he really ready to go on a 50-mile hike with essentially no food, no water, anything? That's what they had to do. They only had 10-minute breaks. Now, the common law is, the common theory is a lot of people fell by the wayside and got shot. But now I have some evidence just recently that that was actually not what happened. And actually, very few people actually died on the march, which is, when you think about it, given their physical condition, that's amazing. Forget about being shot, just to survive marching through a blizzard in that condition. But what seems to have happened is when people fell by the wayside, they just couldn't go any further, they essentially rested there. And you had a 3-mile line of people coming, and people behind would pick them up. So they basically got a rest break in the snow. And this kept them from freezing to death, which if they were just left there almost certainly would have happened, or being shot by the German guards. So it's a little unclear what the level of actual casualties were. But it was a horrendous walk. So here's a map, and that red dot on the right of the map, is Stalag Luft 3, and you can see that dotted line that loops below. That was the march they took to Spremberg. I hope you can read that, but from there they were loaded onto cattle cars, stuffed really into cattle cars, no food, no water, just we're moving you in. And kind of the attitude, I guess, is if you survive, great. If you don't, you don't. But we are taking you deeper into Germany for safekeeping from the Russians. And on the pink page, which I'm sure you can't see, is a map drawn by one of the actual prisoners and put into a 60 or 65-page artist sketchbook that he kept pencil drawings and notes through his imprisonment, which I have a copy of, and that's taken from that. So that's a contemporaneous map by one of the prisoners. In terms of the conditions, this is from one of the British prisoners involved in this, and I just highlighted some in red rather than read the whole thing. At 9 p.m., we were told to be ready to march at an hour's notice. Blizzard raging outside. This is when they were told, we're heading out. Not much time to prep. Then next day, in bitter weather and blowing blizzard, 700 of us were pushed in a barn bare of straw. Some of the men in very bad condition, bitterly cold, had marched 34 kilometers, about 20 miles. So that was day one, 20 miles through a blizzard. Next day, covered another 24 kilometers, another 15 miles or so. After that, thoughts set in and roads in bad state. A couple of the prisoners had the opportunity to make essentially a sled. And they took whatever they had in their barracks and threw it on the sled in the hour they had to prepare. But once the thaw set in, the roads turned to mud. And they couldn't drag anything. So they had whatever they had on their bodies, and they had to finish the rest of the trip. And cattle cars passed through some village at 7 p.m., suffering caused through lack of water. Next day, had marched 90 kilometers and done 300 in the cattle trucks. Majority sick, some in very bad state. So it was a horrendous thing. And this was happening in all the prison camps, the POW camps, on the German eastern border. Okay? But Eventually, they came to a bridge. And across the bridge, and it's not the George Washington Bridge, it's a little bridge across a small river. On the other side is Patton's army. What had happened was the Russians were coming this way from the east. The POWs were being marched deeper into Germany to not get captured by the Russians. And in the meantime, here comes Patton from the other side, and they basically met up. So now they're at this bridge. They know the German guards, they know they lost the war. They've really suffered through this march as much as the prisoners, although they started in better shape physically. And they just said, all right, we're done. And they let the American prisoners walk across the bridge and be liberated by Patton's army, and they just walked back into Germany and probably just walked home and just disappeared. As my father put it, they were guests of the German government. They were now in Allied or American hands. They came back to England. They got on a Liberty boat and came into New York, and their war was over. Remember the B-17 that blew up? Not so fast. Come with me to the village of Store Headage. It's 20 or 30 miles south of Copenhagen. What you can see, I hope you can see it, with that red arrow on the right is the village hospital of Store Headage. This is a very small, rural, agricultural village. Look at that. That's a B-17. And you can read the tail number on it. And the K is from Kim Bolton, and the triangle is their insignia. That is the actual plane that started in Kim Bolton, flew to Stettin. That's Lassie come home. Okay? So what happened? The pilot, when he circled around, everybody jumped, he reset the compass to go out over the ocean. Plane's on fire. Somehow the plane did not blow up. And it flew on until it ran out of gas, basically. And it came into this village of Store Headage, where for 30 minutes they heard this airplane down on the ground, and they saw it circling around lower and lower with one engine working. And eventually it sort of skidded on the ground and came to a halt at the hospital. All hell broke loose. Bad things happened at the hospital. First of all, of course, there was some damage. And nurse trainee Inga Skov was on duty that time, and she wrote a note to her parents, she was from another village. And you know, when you're a young girl and you're writing home to your parents, you kind of want to make it sound like it's not so bad, right? So she, well, there was a loud bang. We hurried out to see what was going on. But you could just imagine this airplane slamming into the corner of this hospital. It's not a very big hospital to begin with. Strange. It's not your everyday experience. The rubble and debris looked terrible. They had 6 children in the hospital at the time being treated for, normal, simple stuff. So what they did was they wrapped the kids in blankets and they handed them out the windows to the other nurses, and they got them out of the hospital because they didn't know if things are going to blow up or what, or the building's going to collapse. So they dropped the kids out. Well, they didn't drop them. They handed them out of the window. The ambulances took the kids and they drove them home for safekeeping. and that was it. There was one close call. The head nurse, Christensen was her name, she was in her room when this happened, but she happened to step out to go to the bathroom. When she came back in, there was an engine of a B-17 sitting in her bed, right? So probably would have killed her if she was lying in the bed. As it turns out, there were no injuries. But you can imagine this will shake up your day. So this is one of the 6 children, 60 years later. It's amazing what you can find on the internet. This is a still from a 10-minute videotape, a YouTube video, where they interviewed the town historian and eyewitnesses to this event. So he was one of the 6 that was put in a blanket and handed out. He was ballpark 10 years old, so he has, 60 years later, in the early 2000s, he had memory of this. And he explained in this video exactly what it was like from his perspective. And, you know, as I'm doing this research, I'm thinking, what are the odds? You know, how can you even think? You hardly know what to go look for because you can't believe this stuff still exists. But it does, and you can find it. Here's an eyewitness account, and it says pretty much what I just read. The 6 kids were evacuated as they were afraid of fire and explosion, but the only damage was a stairway in the hospital building and the airplane. And it talks about what I just described. Okay, so there were no injuries in the town. Head nurse Christensen almost got buried by a B-17 engine, but did not. So the Germans had captured the crew, but they couldn't find the airplane. So they figured it crashed in the ocean. It would have been the normal thing for the crew to do. So now they've got the crew, no airplane. In Denmark, the Germans had the airplane, but they couldn't find a crew, right? So what do Nazis do in a situation like that? You torture the locals, right? You figure they're hiding the crew, so you torture them. And there was no crew for them to reveal, so you know they all survived that torture to whatever degree it was. But they got their revenge, the nurses did, because a week later, the head German came to the hospital. He had, you know, stomach indigestion or something, and he wanted some medicine. So they complied with his wish, and they gave him medicine, like super horse pill medicine, right? So he probably, well, I won't get too graphic. They got their revenge through the medication. Okay, so end of Act 3. So the finale. Now here we're going to jump a little bit in time. The book. The crew never knew that the plane did not blow up. As far as the entire crew knew, that plane blew up, crashed in pieces into the Baltic, end of story. They found out, 2 of them found out, well, one of them found out 40 years later, in 1985, 1986, something of that sort. So Jim Miller, Sergeant Jim Miller, who was the tail gunner, so he's the guy in the back of the plane with his machine gun, gets anybody coming in from the rear. He wrote a little story. First of all, he said, through his entire military experience, training, combat, prisoner, through his entire training, the time he was most scared was when he was in his little bubble in the back of the plane, in the tail of the plane, and his legs were dangling out, and he was about to jump. He said, that's when I was really scared. I get it. I might have been more scared if somebody was shooting at me, but who am I to say? He ended up taking a job in Washington State. And in 1985, a couple of his coworkers were at some book thing, like a book recycling event, and they found this book. It was a picture book in Danish. And they took it out of the line and brought it back to show him. And he's thumbing through, you know, they knew he was in the war. Oh, you might be interested in this. He's thumbing through, and he sees that picture of the plane. Whoops, there it is. He sees that picture, and he says, oh my God, that was my airplane. It didn't blow up. Now, what are the odds of this, right? So he writes a letter. He was sharing Christmas cards with the bombardier, and he puts this picture in, and it's like 5 years later. It's like 1989, 4 or 5 years later, and he says, look at this. And of course, the bombardier, Harry Jensen, recognizes the airplane. They all knew the tail number. That was the first time that word started to get out that the plane did not blow up in midair. Now, much of the crew had died by that point. Not all of them, but most of them. So most of them went to their grave not knowing what happened, and this whole side of the Denmark story. I said we're going to jump back in time. I mentioned June Lockhart. Why did I mention June Lockhart? Because good old Harry, he saw June Lockhart on TV in one of the morning talk shows, 1989, 1990, and he wrote her a letter. And this is an excerpt from the letter, and I will read you the letter. I remember what had happened was June Lockhart's father had offered them to stay at his place for the night, and they did. They wake up the next morning. They have no idea that June Lockhart is there. And at that point, who's June Lockhart? Jean's daughter, right? She's 17 years old. So I remember having breakfast in a room with large windows overlooking a beautiful landscaped yard. And now is where you come in. This is Harry to June Lockhart, 1989. You entered the room and poured us our coffee, and as I recall, you were wearing a beautiful negligee. Well, our eyes popped out. I mean, they're 22, 24 years old, right? Well, our eyes popped out, and in later years, whenever I saw you on TV or in the movies, I would always remind my wife, Vi, she once served me coffee in a beautiful negligee. Bad move. Maybe that cost him 5 years out of his life, 10 years out of his life. Don't go telling your wife this story. So in those days, there was a popular one-hour radio program. Your father got us studio tickets. It was a memorable weekend, one in which I have never forgotten. June Lockhart wrote him back, 1989. Phoned him. June phoned me after receiving the letter and was fascinated with the story. She denies the negligee, saying she was only 17, probably had on a robe. I told her that I knew the difference. Which, okay, I'm not getting in the middle of that one. And they continued to write letters until he died, I think in 2002, about 10 years after this. Okay? So that's where the Lockhart family, the Lockhart family interacted with this crew from Jean, picking them up one evening and offering them a place to stay, all the way through the late 90s with Harry writing occasional letters back and forth with June Lockhart. So that's why they are a part of the cast here. Harry Jensen his parents had come from Denmark. He was from Danish heritage. He went back before he died. He died, I think, in 2002. He went back to the village before he died. And he found there was a museum to the Ghost Flight. The Ghost Flight was the name given to it because there was no crew when the plane crashed. So it became locally famous. And they kept pieces of the airplane. So the townspeople gave him a piece of the bombardier's equipment that he would have worked from. So 1944 to 1995, 50 years later, they gave him this piece of the equipment from his own airplane, which I thought was pretty nice. Here's Stonehenge now and then. And that red arrow shows the hospital. The hospital is still there. It's now actually a nursing home. And the village has grown up a little bit, like they all do, in the past 60 years. It's still pretty much an agricultural site. And that's where, I believe, that's where the museum is located. Kim Bolton, the air base that they left, that they were based in England, on the left is the aerial shot of that air base during the war with all the storage spots and the runways. On the right is the same piece of farm country today. It's a go-kart race track, okay? But it's still basically agricultural. This is the crew, then and now, okay? And as you read the names and you read the dates, some of them died, as I say, relatively young. Some of them a little bit longer. Interesting, if you look at the left, Ed Ayers and John Fode, one was from North Dakota, one was from South Dakota. So that, remember, they came back on the Liberty ship to New York. They get on the train to Chicago. They're heading home, see their families, and pick up their lives. And one of them says, you know, why don't you stay with me and my family for a couple of days before you go on? And he did. And so John Fode stayed with Ed Ayers, and the result of that, married Ed Ayers' sister. And that is the lady in the lower left in that pale blue dress. She is John Fode's wife and Ed Ayers' sister. So when we did the Zoom call, of course, their children, both sides, they were cousins. So they knew each other, okay? But none of the rest of us did. Harry Jensen, up in the rocking chair. I'll just kind of go around. He came back, picked up his life, ended up breeding show dogs, okay? So they were championship dogs, and that's all I know about the dog business. But he lived to 2002, died in 2002. Below is my father. He died in '99. Unfortunately, and one of the great regrets, when I first found out about the plane, that picture of the plane crashed into the hospital, I first found that in 1999, 6 months after he died. I would love to have shown him that picture and say, wrong, you know, but wasn't meant to be. My father had a store on Long Island for 15 years, maybe a little more than that, and never knew that John Whitelaw in the upper right lived about a mile away. Right? They picked up on their lives, they went about, and it just so happens John Whitelaw had a house that he was inherited by his niece. Okay? So to this day, she lives in what was his house a mile from my father's store. Okay? Just, near misses and amazing coincidences. And you see in kind of the bottom next to my father, Jim Miller. He's the one that found the book. Words from Harry Jensen. Yes, Lassie was just like her namesake. She tried to get back to her home in England, but crashed in Denmark. Maybe she knew I was a Dane, both my parents having been born in Denmark, and that someone there would help her. I'll never know, and I'll never forget you. It's pretty nice sentiment. Okay, so remember I said the crew of a B-17 was 10 people. If you were really paying attention, there were only 9 of them here. This plane took off on a combat mission, short-crewed, down 1 gunner. Here's a question that can never be, and I know the name of the guy, and he might have been injured, he might have been sick, he might have been on leave, whatever it was. But here's the question that can never be answered. If they had that other gunner, would the fighter have been able to get in close enough to shoot them down? And would any of this happen? Right? Everything is like a coincidence. The strangest little difference can just change everything. All right, there are many stories. They were all 20, 22, 24 years old. This is not my father was a hero. This is, oh my gosh, you can really do some research if you really put your mind to it. It's unbelievable what's on the internet. Okay, so that book, the picture book, I found out about that about a week ago. I had no idea. I knew the story of the book because I had Harry Jensen's letter. But it was only a week ago, by just Googling randomly, that I found out that Jim Miller, who was the owner of the book, he had died in Hillsboro, Oregon, in whatever the year was, 2000-ish. There was an eBay store with that book in Hillsboro, Oregon. So I contacted, as best I could, the storefront. He sent me back. I said, "Where'd you get this?" And I know the answer, but he sent back, I got it in an estate sale. I don't know where it was. This was the actual book that was rescued from the recycling facility, that was brought by his coworkers to Jim Miller and then shared, and eventually it got out. And that book will be delivered to me on Friday. So this is, it's a never-ending search. Little things pick up, come along all the time. This plaque, this marble plaque, is at Kim Bolton at the go-kart track now, to this day. It's a memorial to the crews that took off from Kim Bolton, and there's nothing spectacular about it, but it is a memorial. They flew 350 combat missions in B-17 Flying Fortress to destroy targets in Germany and occupied Europe during World War II in memory of those who served, ... So that's the memorial that's there today. And the patches are from this crew's squadron. And that's it. Happy to answer any questions, discuss whatever you'd like. I'm here until they pull the plug. Yes, miss.